I heard you deal in some rare specimens. The concourse of the space station's main commercial zone was busy today. Species from all across the known galaxy hustling to and fro, haggling and heckling and barging their way through the crowds, all intent on making a good deal. Not at all interested in the Hebdian trader of exotic animals, but he looked around suspiciously even so. His 5 eyes snaked around on the ends of their stalks, checking the vicinity, then came back to rest on his customer. Daxian, a common species in this sector. Bipedal, 4-armed, covered in white fur that was starkly contrasted by this one's black jumpsuit. Only 2 eyes, but you have to make allowances for aliens, known to be commercially minded. After a moment, the Hebdian waved one of his manipulator tentacles casually and said, "You must mean the giant ruby slugs that just got in from Espaspus. Follow me." He turned and headed back through his store. The Daxian followed, and now it was his turn to glance around nervously as they passed through stack after stack of cages. Razor-tooth kai, spine snappers, the highly venomous jubble, and many more species he didn't even recognize. Something with fangs larger than his head crashed against its cage, jaws gnashing, and the Daxian jumped back so far he almost blundered into the red-eyed carrion wisp on the other side. The exotic animal trader slapped his tentacle on the cage, and the fanged xenoform retreated back into the shadows. When they got to the back of the store, the Hebdian trader paused. He looked at the Daxian appraisingly, then beckoned him closer with a tentacle. The Daxian leaned in. "All right, what are you really after? I've got some nebula beetles, guaranteed to cause hallucinations in 95% of sentient species, including Daxians." His customer hesitated, and the trader pressed on. "If you're looking for something a little more unique, well, I have a shadow-skin sand jumper. They're very popular right now, and they're almost extinct, so you're not likely to find them elsewhere. No? All right, I've got a Katorian brooder. Wait until she's ready to give birth, then boil her alive in her own milk. Absolutely delicious. They're considered a great delicacy among the Gadirans. You're virtually guaranteed to make a profit if you're willing to make the journey." The Daxian still did not look convinced. "Well, come on then. I don't have all day. I've got other customers to see to," the Hebdian said, brazenly ignoring the fact that both of them could clearly see there was no one else in the store. "Just spit it out. Whatever it is, I promise you, it's not the strangest request I've ever had." The Daxian looked over his shoulder nervously, then whispered, "I'm looking for for a human." For a moment, the Hebdian's constantly undulating tentacles froze. Just for a moment, then with a wholly unconvincing attempt at calmness, the trader answered, "Sorry, that's not the sort of thing I'd know about." "I was told you have one in stock right now. Ferris the Ogador said to let you know I was a genuine collector of curiosities, if you get my drift." The Hebdian rolled his eyes, which was quite the effect with 5 of them. "Well, why didn't you open with that? Nearly gave me a coronary seizure. Okay, if Ferris knows you, then I guess you're all right. Come right this way, and we'll have a little talk." He slithered over to a cage that looked like it contained a sporcupine, whose flat-bladed spines were known to be able to slice through even molecularly bonded nanoalloys. This one must have been made of plastic, however, because the Hebdian flipped it up and then pressed the button hidden underneath. A section of the wall slid aside, cages and all. The Hebdian entered the concealed passage, and after a moment's hesitation the Daxian followed. As soon as he did so, the wall slid back into place, the very real animals in the cages hissing and snapping with rage. The passageway must have been an old service corridor that had been forgotten and blocked over. The Daxian was fairly sure it didn't appear on any of the station's plans. The Hebdian kept going as it wound through the pipework and conduits. Then they reached a rusty-looking staircase. Floor after floor they followed it down. They must have been deep in the engineering levels by now, but the Daxian had only the vaguest idea where. Finally they reached the bottom of the staircase, followed the passage a little way along, then came to a section that looked newer. Almost as if someone had inserted a purpose-built hideout into the bowels of the station, where no one would ever think to look for it. much less stumble across it by accident. A little further on, and they came to a circular door. There were two Hebdians sitting outside it, playing a game on a checkered board that the Daxian didn't recognize. Their rubbery tentacles had scars on them, and they were very visibly strapped up with multiple pistols. One of their eye stalks turned, but otherwise they ignored the newcomers, focused on their game. Then the traitor smacked a tentacle on the wall, and all 10 of their combined eyes snapped round. That's better. The cartel isn't paying you to laze around. I've got a customer, do your job. One of the guards got up and ran a scanner over the Daxian in the most insolent way possible, then waved a tentacle dismissively. He's clean. The hatch irised open, then closed behind them. I'm afraid before we go any further, I'll have to ask to see proof of funds, the traitor requested. The Daxian reached into a pocket in his jumpsuit and briefly flashed a credit chip. A one-time cryptographic device that could be loaded with your currency of choice, unhackable, anonymous, and no need for any third-party verification. Accepted by all major banks and government financial entities. Hand over the chip itself with the passcode, or upload its contents at a networked terminal to the recipient's financial institution. The ultimate in fungible tokens. The Hebdian trader had seen plenty of them before, but judging from the way all 5 of his eyes blinked at once, he'd never seen a chip displaying a number that large. And that's in New Galactic Novas? He asked, voice suddenly a little hoarse. 1,000 cycles, dozens of market crashes, and NGNs always hold their value. I trust that this will do? Oh, absolutely. That'll do nicely. Very nicely. Ahem. The Hebdian paused a moment to pull himself together. Yes, well, I'd better show you the merchandise, hadn't I? He led the Daxian along the gleaming corridor. There were several iris hatches along the walls, and the Daxian's head turned as they passed. The Hebdian, who was keeping 2 of his eyes on him while the others faced forward, said, If you're wondering what's behind them, the answer is cartel property. It's best not to inquire further than that. There was a thump as something threw itself against one of the doors. And if something in here decides to take an interest in us? The Daxian asked, a little nervously. Don't worry. The vaults are built with nanocomposites. You could set off a small fission bomb inside one and not do more than leave a burn mark on the walls. Anyway, here we are. The traitor stopped outside one of the doors. Now, before I open this door, I've got to ask. You know what you're getting into, right? Buying a human, I mean. I always thought entrepreneurs like you didn't ask your customers too many questions. Oh, what you do with it is entirely your own business. The Hebdian waved a tentacle dismissively. If you want to jettison it into space as soon as you've bought it, that's all the same to me. However, were something unfortunate to happen, that might lead to questions. And you are absolutely right that entrepreneurs like me do not like questions. So I'd just like to check that you understand the risks involved with your purchase. Look, I'm only buying one of them. I've got a habitat waiting for it with state-of-the-art security. How dangerous can they really be? The trader held up his tentacles in alarm. Whoa, how dangerous can they really be? Those are not the words of someone who's taken an appropriate level of precautions for dealing with a human. Don't you know anything about them? I know they were discovered by the Reticulans. If they can handle humans, they can't be that bad. Oh, the sneaky little gray bastards might have discovered them, but they never kept them for long. Always sold them on to someone else and walked away with the cash before shit hit the fan. Smart. Or at least it was until they got greedy. At first they were just selling them as curiosities. One here, one there. Maybe a breeding pair every so often. Then they realized there was big money to be made selling them to the Sartoxian Empire. What would the Sartoxians want with a primitive species like humans? The Daxian folded both pairs of arms. Clearly he thought the Hebdian was exaggerating the demand for humans. I mean, they're exotic, but Sartoxians don't do luxury goods. In fact, they famously don't care about anything except expanding their empire. Although from what I hear, that's not going so well these days. Something about a civil war or something? I don't really follow the news. The Hebdian looked at the Daxian like he was pointedly refraining from calling him an idiot. Yeah, it's a civil war, all right. And what do you think started that? Humans? You're kidding. Sartoxians are one of the biggest military powers in the quadrant. Not anymore. Not since they got involved with humans. But how? The Daxian asked, baffled. All that expansion created a massive economic strain. Their industry simply couldn't produce enough mechanoids to fill all the menial roles that needed filling. So some bright spark had the idea, or was given it by the Greys, to start using humans to plug the gaps. After all, they're strong, durable, and reasonably trainable. They can hold a wide range of tools and follow instructions. Maybe not as well as a robot, but fit a shock collar on them and they'll soon learn. And they're cheap. Building a mechanoid takes all sorts of complicated tech, but the Greys could just scoop them off their home world for free, minus transportation costs, of course. I guess it didn't work that easily then? Oh no, it worked all right. Soon there was such a demand for humans from the Sartoxians that the Greys were sending them thousands in every shipment. There was some wastage, of course. Not every human was trainable. But with enough pain, the Sartoxians could make them do just about anything a basic general-purpose robot could do. And with more autonomy, too. Soon there were humans everywhere. In every factory, every city, every spaceship. So what was the problem? Well, the thing was, the Greys hadn't been entirely forthright about the world they found the humans on. Shocking, isn't it? A dishonest Grey? Never would have expected it. If the Hebdian had piled the sarcasm any deeper, they would have drowned in it. To be honest, for taking the sales pitch at face value, the Sartoxians had it coming to them. The Greys described the human home planet as an uncharted, undeveloped world. You mean it isn't? Well, it was an exaggeration. The Greys weren't going to announce that they'd found a new sentient species, were they? All those legal complications interfering with their business. So they told the truth in the most misleading way possible. I mean, if someone tells you they found a new species on an undeveloped planet, you think of something feral, living naked in the woods, right? Maybe capable of hunting with a pointy stick, but nothing more than that. Humans can make more than pointy sticks, huh? Oh, much more. They aren't what you would call civilized, but they've got as far as sending communication satellites into orbit. Unfortunately for the Sartoxians, what they haven't got as far as is unifying their planet. Very violent place, the human homeworld. So they were both a lot more intelligent than the Sartoxians thought they were, and not nearly as susceptible to intimidation. Once the Sartoxians started putting thousands of them together, it was only a matter of time before one of them worked out how to turn off the shock collars. The Daxian winced. Ouch. I've seen the details of human anatomy, having thousands of them rampaging everywhere. Not a pretty sight, I'd imagine. Oh, it was so much worse than that. When a pack of Zellian sword tongues gets loose, that's not a pretty sight. I had a shipment once that, well, I won't go into the gory details, but sword tongues don't think. They just go for the nearest prey they can find. Just imagine what they could do if they could, say, hack the lock on the door their prey is hiding behind, or better yet, knew how to wait until the moment their prey was most vulnerable. I told you, humans are smarter than they look. Much smarter. Once they figured out how to turn off the shock collars, they didn't immediately run rampant. No, they started planning. First, they set about investigating all the restricted areas they'd never been allowed in, gathering information and weapons. Some of them had been laboring for the Sartoxians for more than half their standard lifespan. They were quite familiar with their technology by that point. And meanwhile, the Sartoxians were far too preoccupied fighting external threats to notice what was going on right under their noses. The humans waited, and then they killed everyone. And I mean, everyone. They struck in a single, synchronized attack, somehow coordinated across the whole empire. Entire battle fleets were overrun by their support workers, factories sabotaged, regiments of soldiers blown to pieces by their own weapons before they could even get out of their barracks. Humans are lethal enough unarmed, but once they'd worked out how to use a plasma cannon, well, I bet every Sartoxian who'd ever used a shock collar regretted it. The Daxian was silent, soberly considering this mental image. Then after a moment he pulled himself together. Well, Sucks to be a Sartoxian, I guess, but I'm not looking for a whole slave labor force. One specimen for my menagerie is enough. Oh, it sucks for anyone in the human trade, my friend. These days, the Galactic Council is coming down hard on anyone who deals in humans. Word is a bill is going through the Council to recognize humans as a sentient species. But that's already a moot point as far as we're concerned now that they've changed the customs designation to a Class 1 prohibited organism. I know collectors who've had theirs for ages who've been forced to give them up. After what happened to the Sartoxians, no government wants humans on their world. And now that the humans have a bunch of Sartoxian warships, no one wants to be the next species they turn on. Sartoxians are such hermits, the details of the human uprising aren't mainstream knowledge yet, but it'll happen soon. And when it does, your neighbors will probably turn you into the cops if they so much as get a hint that you've got a human in captivity. Okay, I get it. The Daxian held up all four of his arms in submission. Humans are dangerous, but I have a whole menagerie full of the galaxy's most dangerous life forms. I know what I'm doing. You'd better. I'm telling you, you mess up around one of these things and you won't get a second chance. You'll be lucky if the cops manage to arrest you before it rips you limb from limb. Like I said, point taken. I'll be extremely careful. Sheesh. I've never known a black market xenoform dealer be so reluctant to take my money. No offense intended, but you've got to be extra careful in this business. Like I said, anything happens to you and there's a chance it'll be traced back to me. So I'll ask you one last time. Are you sure you can handle this? The Daxian looked him in the eye, or at least picked 2 of the 5 stalks to focus on, and said seriously, I promise you, I will be as careful as I possibly can be. Now, are we doing this or not? All right then, the Hebdian trader said, somewhat mollified. He turned and held a key card up to the locking panel. This room is partitioned by a force field. We'll be on one side, the human on the other. You can look as much as you like, but don't get too close unless you want your fur singed. The force field is non-lethal, but it'll give you a nasty zap. If the human moves towards the force field, don't panic. It can't get through. Just keep your distance, and in the very unlikely event that anything does go wrong, just get out of the room and we'll seal the main door, okay? Okay. Well, here we go. The Hebdian took a deep breath and pressed the keycard against the panel. The door hissed open. The Hebdian slithered into the vault, and with just a moment's hesitation, the Daxian followed him. As you can see, this specimen has pale skin, light yellow hair, blue eyes, and is approximately 284 megaseconds old. That's about 9 years on her home planet. The girl was sitting on a metal bench attached to the wall, and had apparently been occupying herself by braiding her hair when they came in. Juvenile? Only safe way to do it. Don't get complacent, though. She's already more than halfway to being a fully grown adult. They're lethal at half a terasecond, and I do mean lethal. I've traded in most things that can hunt you, but the way these things move, she could cross this room in a second flat, and they're extremely intelligent. This one, when she looks at you, you can see she's working things out. The little girl raised her hand and waved awkwardly. She looked mildly curious about the 2 funny-looking creatures who'd come to say hello. Both the Hebdian and the Daxian took a step back. Then, when she didn't leap towards the force field, relaxed a little. So, do we have a deal? The Hebdian asked. Oh, we have a deal, all right. This is exactly what I've been looking for. The Daxian held out the credit chip. The Hebdian closed an undulating tentacle around the small fortune in untraceable currency, and a noticeable shiver of satisfaction ran through his extremities. It's been a pleasure doing business with you. Oh, believe me, the pleasure's mine. In fact, I'd like to give you a little bonus, just a small token of my esteem. The Daxian reached into a pocket in his jumpsuit and pulled out a small disc, a little holographic projector. The Hebdian took it, frowning slightly, and pressed the activation button. A small hologram of the Daxian's face appeared in the air, the Galactic Council's logo superimposed on it. Oh, she, Agent Luvos Danak of Galactic Customs Bureau, the Daxian announced. Hold it, he shouted, as the Hebdian turned towards the door, and a compact pistol unfolded from a barely noticeable stud implanted in his hand. The Hebdian froze. "That's right. Stop right there and get your tentacles in the air." The Hebdian did as he was ordered. "Galbahabad the Exoticist, I'm arresting you under Section 7, Subparagraph 2 of the Dangerous Species Import Act, Section 9 of the Sentient Rights Act, and Section 1 Subparagraph 2 of the Anti-Slavery Act, not to mention about half a dozen local station regulations about keeping hazardous life forms on board. Oh, and I'm sure when we search the rest of this place we'll find a whole heap of other things to charge you with too." "Ferris sold me out, huh?" "If it's any comfort, it's not like we gave him much of a choice. He was looking at a terasecond in isolation on the tax evasion alone before we even started talking about what he'd been smuggling." "All right, you got me." The Hebdian shrugged. "Now maybe if you put that pistol down you'll get out of here alive. The cartel isn't just going to let you walk out of here with me, you know." "You hear that?" Agent Danak asked. He paused for a moment and the Hebdian looked at him puzzled. "That's right. I don't hear anything either. There's sensors all over this vault. If those goons on the door were going to come, they'd have done it when I drew my weapon. You know that credit chip you're holding? It's more than just a credit chip. My backup's been tracking our location all the way here." The Hebdian's next words were unrepeatable in civilized company. All in all, Agent Danak thought, it had been a very successful operation. Not only had they finally nailed Galbahabad red-handed, or rather red-tentacled, they'd swept up a couple of cartel operatives, and best of all, found one of their stash houses. Watching Galbahabad getting led away in cuffs was still the most satisfying part, though. Endangered species all across the galaxy would be a little less endangered now that he'd be spending at least the next few hundred megaseconds behind a force field. And that was if he cooperated. The cartel wouldn't take this lying down, of course, but Danak wasn't scared of them. They might have their tentacles in deep at the planetary level, but the Galactic Council wasn't going to turn a blind eye to human smuggling. The Bureau wasn't going to let them slide away this time, and they'd soon find out that agents like Danak couldn't be as easily intimidated as local law enforcement. "We've checked the other vaults, sir." Danak turned. It was Agent Tigo, a large quadrupedal Girian with red fur that was currently standing on end. "Good work. Anything particularly interesting?" "Well, we've only been able to do a cursory inspection so far, but I'd say there's enough to keep the prosecutors busy for the next 50 megaseconds at least. The crime scene guys have started bagging some of the easier-to-store items, but there's a lot of stuff that's not exactly safe to handle. Speaking of which..." He looked towards the human, and Danak realized why his fur was standing on end. Even though she was calmly sitting on the floor, behind a force field, he was still nervous around her. "Take it easy, Tigo. It's not like she's throwing herself at the force field trying to rip our faces off." The human was staring at them with a mildly bemused expression. "She probably just wants to go home." "So, are you going to get her out of there?" Danak looked at the young human. She was sitting with her chin on her palms, kicking her heels against the wall. Then he turned back to Tigo and looked levelly at his subordinate. "You're kidding, right? I'm not going in there with her." "But immigration enforcement have to repatriate her. We'll let them deal with her. Another megasecond or two and they'll have her back with her own kind. But until then..." He took another look at the girl, then closed the vault door. It'd only be another few centiseconds before immigration showed up. But better safe than sorry. He was an agent of the Galactic Council. He was as brave as they got. But he wasn't stupid. You didn't take any unnecessary risks, especially not when you were dealing with humans.